Good morning to our audience in Guyana and North America, and good afternoon to those joining us in the UK. On behalf of Moray House Trust, welcome to another talk in the Samaan series entitled Unfinished Genesis, the Process of Painting and Making. And sincere apologies for the typo on the Zoom registration page, which was entirely down to me and fat fingers. For any newcomers, Moray House Trust is a private, non-partisan, non-profit based in Georgetown, dedicated to promoting Guyanese culture and public discourse. My name is Isabel de Caires, and I'm the Chair of Trustees at Moray House Trust and your host this afternoon. Today's talk is part of a new-ish initiative by the Trust, short, daytime, midweek sessions aimed at those with curious minds and a little free time during the day. As the name suggests, the Samaan Tree Series seeks to draw on local habits and traditions, traditions of gathering, of talking, of listening. We welcome suggestions and volunteers for future talks. And I'm not ashamed to volunteer anyone I see in the audience who might have something to contribute, so beware. There are two concepts underpinning the inspiration for today's discussion. The first draws on the thinking of our national poet, Martin Carter. Martin once said that he considered his poems to be fragments, unfinished segments of a larger work, a work of cosmic dimensions and pretensions, the ultimate poem. The ultimate poem exists only as an aspiration. For Martin, the writing of poems was a process, a journey with no settled destination, only resting points, troughs, potholes, and so forth. As it was with Martin's poems, so it is with many works of art. The artist or maker often sees each piece as a work in progress, flawed and incomplete, an approximation of what they set out to achieve. Some live comfortably with that circumstance. Others continually struggle to somehow circumvent or overcome it. The second concept is drawn from the work of Wilson Harris. The title of the talk is a nod to Wilson Harris's lecture in 1992, titled The Unfinished Genesis of the Imagination. In it, Harris offers up what he calls the numinous and unsuspected resources of the imagination as a means to think beyond and outside of our conventional frameworks and the partial models of discourse, of tradition, of thinking that constrain and confine us. In this reading, the creative process, the act of creating a work of art, is both finite and infinite. And I should say that's, of course, only my interpretation of Wilson's words, and it is, of course, open to challenge. This pairing of Stanley and Dennis arose out of a realization that Dennis Caires and Stanley Greaves have very different approaches to the process of creating a work of art, and that there is not much public discussion about the process as opposed to the product. Dennis Caires was born in Georgetown in the 1950s. His family emigrated in 1970. He studied painting at Winchester School of Art, the Royal College of Art, London, and Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris. He has shown his work in a number of galleries in Europe and has also exhibited regularly in the Caribbean, most notably Barbados, where the majority of his one-person exhibitions have been held. He's best known for the intense high-key palette of his paintings, and his interest lies in establishing the materiality of color and a desire to create plastic space in two dimensions. Dennis cites elsewhere a desire to make paintings that are contemplative and encourage a slower reading of the world. Stanley Greaves is a regular contributor to our work at Moray House and will be a familiar face to many in the audience. Stanley began his studies with Edward Burrows in the Working People's Art classes, I should say. He attended the University of Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK to study painting, majoring in sculpture for the BA Honours degree in Fine Art. And he was a Fulbright scholar at Howard University, where he studied printmaking and sculpture for his Master of Fine Arts degree. Stanley works mainly in painting, but has also produced sculpture, drawings, prints, and pottery, all of which he considers forms of making. Greaves is a self-described maker of things. Stanley has exhibited in the Caribbean and further afield, representing Guyana at various biennales and Barbados once, and at universities and galleries in the United States of America, where he's lived for over 15 years. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dennis to offer up his portion, and then we'll proceed to Stanley. Okay. Thanks, Dennis. Over to you.
Thank you, Isabel. Firstly, Mr. Cat. Good morning, good afternoon, good day to everybody. I am pleased to be doing this. I worked with Stanley. We taught together at Barbados Community College, and I've known him and his work for a long time. And we've talked about work, but we've never really talked about this aspect of our work, different approaches. And we end up making sometimes small paintings that hang on a wall, but the way they got there is quite different. And so I'm looking forward to not really a talk, but just a chat. And I've prepared some slides to kind of structure this idea of Genesis. But I really just looking forward to this as a discussion with Stanley and others. Any questions? I'm trying to keep this very open and general. So if you don't understand something which might seem obvious to me, just ask. So a lot of differences between how Stanley and I arrive at things, but there are we have a lot of common ground. And I think one thing when we talk about Genesis of a painting or of a ceramic pot or a poem or whatever it is, I was speaking to a distinguished writer recently, and we were talking about making. And in the end, it comes down to two words: hard work. So underpin it with that, it's hard work. And the other thing that I was thinking about, there's a Danish Barbadian art critic called Therese Hatchety, who knows my work and Stanley's work. She knows it well, and she's looked at it in depth. And so I'm giving you my viewpoint, and I guess I'm saying I'm not sure if artists are to be trusted about what they say about their work. And what Therese brings to both myself and Stan, she makes my most severe critics look like little Bo Peep because her scrutiny is so rigorous. So I am going to whiz through some slides, and I put some text in there to kind of help me, because I go a bit gaga when I see a Zoom, when I see myself talking on the screen, I forget things. So this is myself and Stanley, and I vaguely just three things. First thing is a short warning. That we don't trust artists. I mean, take on board what they're saying, but other informed people have very, very useful and pertinent things to say about art. Genesis and the source of paintings, that's the second part I want to talk about. Where my paintings come from. And I think the warning is I don't really know is the answer. And the other part of that answer is I don't really want to know where they come from. As long as they keep coming and I don't run into a blank, I don't really excavate and want to pinpoint it too carefully. So when I talk about the source of the paintings, this is a rough idea to give you some insight. And then the third part, which is quite important in my work, is the making process. So the warning you had, the sources, I quickly go through these, and afterwards it's mostly images. My personal past, I grew up in a big Catholic family in Georgetown. My father was born in Guyana, my grandfather was born in Guyana. I think it was my great-grandfather who came from Madeira as an indentured laborer with all the other Portuguese. And we lived in a big house in Kingston, and then we moved to England. I think I would need a therapist or someone to try and unlock some of that, but that's just a brief. I will come back to my mother later on with an image. My training and education, I trained in the UK and in Paris, and I spent 7 full-time years in tertiary education, which is, I like to tell every architect I meet, is more than they spend in full-time education, and with doctors too. So I spent a lot of time studying, mostly European art, but American and world art, but all my study was in Europe. So that influence, that was extremely important in how I go about making art and thinking about art. The third thing is art itself. I spend ages looking at art, and I just returned from a visit to Georgetown and spent a glorious day looking at some of the really important museums in Georgetown, including the Museum of African Heritage, which has 4 Benin bronzes that are out of this world. And so I look at other art, that feeds me. I love looking at other art. And I look at a wide range. There's a huge show of Vermeer on at the moment in Amsterdam. And I wish I could go to it because it's an amazing exhibition. But that experience of looking at other art is important to me. Artists are important to me and give me ideas, and the source of my paintings, not for the work they produce necessarily, but for who they are. So an example of that would be Frank Bowling in England, who's Guyanese, but lived in England for a long time. And he was hugely important to me in introducing many ideas, but the most important one for me was the idea of the New World and what the imagination from the New World could bring to European art. I mentioned earlier about Stanley's process and knowing him, and I really enjoyed talking with Stanley and finding out how he makes things, because they're so different to how I do it. So his work, I'm putting aside to him, and I'm talking about the artist himself. Philip Moore in Guyana, I knew Philip a little bit and talked to him about his art and life and his religion. And he interests me as an artist in terms of how he produces his work. Okay, so that's some of the influences. Visual ideas, things I've seen sometimes, and this is outside of painting or sculpture or ceramics or whatever it is. This could be, I was in a shop in London, a big food shop, and behind the person serving me was a big photograph of some flowers, and it just stuck in my head. And that's something that I chew over and wanted to do something with. I remember things, literary sources, a description of something. I'll talk about this a bit more later on. So the original idea for the painting can come from a range of visual stimuli, perhaps best to put it. And then the kind of theoretical ideas. My work looks like it's very spontaneous, but I'm very slow. I make a lot of mistakes and I have to see things. I go over and over stuff. And I think about things, and I've been thinking about exterior and interior, old and new, or sometimes a word itself. I love the word dog for the sound that it makes in the head when you see it. When you can't see the word, I'm saying dog. If none of this is making sense, I'm hoping I have some time at the end for questions. The physical location, which I'm beginning to think, and I'm spending more time thinking about this, partly, I think it was a Moray House that we did a talk on Philip Moore, to which I contributed. And I tried to tie together the similarity between him and Armando Riveron, who works in Venezuela. And I'm getting more and more interested in this idea of the present where you are affecting the work you make, and how that might explain some extraordinary work that's produced in the Caribbean, which doesn't have the same support system as a young artist working in New York or London or whatever. A lot of my work comes out of the work that I've made before, the one that happened before, did it work, did it not work? What can I change? What's a new challenge? And then the last thing, which I think is probably the most important, it's utterly unexplainable, and I don't know where they come from. My mother was a very gifted amateur painter, I think, and she painted in Georgetown. And she went to art classes with Marjorie Broodhagen, to which I accompanied her several times, to art lessons at Bishop's High School, girls' school as it was then, after normal school then. I think if she were a young woman today, she would definitely have been studying art. Instead, she looked after 9 children. And then I was looking through this, trying to find the slide. And this is always stuck in my head as I think a second form at Saints. I was selected to read a poem at the City Hall, oratory competition. And I was selected, and I chose Fruit in a Bowl by A.J. Seymour, the first line of which is fruit in a bowl. So I got up on the stage and with my trembling voice said, I declaimed as best I could, Fruit in a Bowl by A.J. Seymour, fruit in a bowl. And a lady rang a bell and said, I didn't ring the bell yet. Start over. So I said fruit in a bowl. So what you see here is what I actually said. And that's all I can remember of the poem, Fruit in a Bowl. So maybe it was some kind of linguistic premonition that as a boy in Guyana, I went to the Georgetown Museum, but I can't remember looking at paintings. But I do remember this painting because, like a lot of Guyanese, we had a set of encyclopedias that we would look at. And I remember distinctly this painting, Blue Boy. And I included it because I happened to see it in London recently as an American collection. And I happened to see it at the National Gallery in London last year. And I thought how strange it was that something I saw in Georgetown, Guyana, that had such a big impact, I could see later on. Literary sources, A Morning at the Office by Mr. Mittelholzer, I think is an extraordinary book. And I did some paintings a few years back, having reread it. And then on the right is a description of rain from Proust that I thought I would include because I'm not comparing my work to Proust. It's about the description of that thing. There's no narrative, it's in the moment. And where I live in Barbados, we get the rain coming across the valley. And so like in a lot of the Caribbean, you can hear the rain coming. Sources also come from things seen that I need to photograph. So I keep a set of these photographs, and then if I decide to use them, I need them, then they go through a process before they get into a painting. Bottom right hand, so I talked about some theoretical ideas. Bottom right-hand corner is from Trinidad, from a Massey, I think, store in Trinidad. I was doing residencies there for a few weeks, and I bought this just because I loved it. I hate the packaging, but I love this idea that this fruit went together, apple, mango. I never did anything with it, but just to give you an idea of how I collect sometimes visual sources with photographs. The photograph on the left, it's a photograph on the left. It's from a German photographer, Heinrich Coon, whose work I saw in Paris about 5 years ago, and it blew me away. He was at the beginning of photography and the beginning of color photography, more importantly. So that was the source. I saw that and thought about it. So the genesis might be that exhibition, but that something happens in my thinking and chewing over these images. And the painting on the right was made for me relatively quickly in 1 year, completed in a relatively short space of time. And that comes almost directly from this. This is a photograph I took. I was trying to document the person in the middle who's holding up a camera, who is a painter who is called Estelle Thompson. I live with this person. And I was documenting her photographing the sea because we swim at this beach every day, and realized I got this extraordinary image of a woman unaware that I, to be honest, I wasn't aware that she was taking she was in the photograph, and I realized she was anonymous. I could use it. And I'm including this one because I tried to make a huge painting from this, and it's been a disaster. And I've not been able to justify it. So it's in the studio here downstairs, and I wanted to include it because it just didn't work. Making. So this is a studio shot from a while ago, just to give you an indication of how many works I have on the go and how I move from one painting to another. Some of these paintings I'm now going to look at. This is a recent painting near Turquoise Avenue. And I wanted to include this because for some bizarre reason I have, when Isabel asked me about the making process, I searched and searched and then found that I had some low-res images. This is professionally photographed. And I have some low-res images that show its progress. And I thought, it might be useful to see how that started as that, and then went to that, to that, to that. And I must have been photographing these for a week or so, because that's all I have. And it changed enormously during the process. So they start that way. This is another painting that's recently completed. And its title, I don't like to be too didactic with the titles, but Yams you all have seen. I met Olive Senior many years ago, and she talked about yams and being rooted to the soil and so on. And I wanted to make this picture, kind of based on yams, celebrating yams, and came across this image of it much earlier on. So this is the final thing, and this is at some point in the making. And on the wall to the left, you can see the source material I've got from the internet as a photograph, and I am transcribing that. So I cut out the shape of the bird, of the toucan. And to the left of that, you can see stencils, plastic stencils, that I also use in paintings. And this is even at another stage. So I went from that to that, to the final version. This is another painting, St. George Table. And this came about in relation to that. Both are exactly the same size, 5 feet by just under 3. So it's a very long rectangle. And I wanted the problem, so in terms of the genesis, so that was a problem. How would you have two paintings the same size, but with a different orientation? How would you resolve that? And what would be the problems in that? So it's not, it doesn't, the water vessel in the right-hand corner is based on a painting by Velázquez, the water cell of Sevilla, I think it is. But that is in a collection in London. And I love the way that the form goes around the pot and across it. So it's 3-dimensional. But the painting isn't about Velasquez. It's really about trying to make this space work. Wrong button, sorry. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button there, but we're good. So these are two paintings, and the top one is that bottom finish painting at some earlier point. And so there are two words on there that say two dogs. And I know they changed because in the top one, it was too prominent. And if you look at the background, I wasn't happy with the rhythms in it, and the shadow underneath took me forever to sort out. Sorry, I'm going to keep gallivanting. So those are two, those are how would you resolve something going vertically and something going horizontally? And how would you get the viewer's eye to move around that without, say, just focusing on a toucan or something else, that every part of the image would retain, that you would maintain harmony and interest across the surface. I included this because we're talking about where paintings come from. That very large painting I showed you has a little, the Turquoise Avenue, has a little still life in the bottom left-hand corner. And I don't normally do this, but I did a study before I did the big painting. That's it, that's the big painting. So I'm pointing as if you can see me. The left-hand side shows a little painting I made. The bottom left shows the two grapefruit I took a photograph of. The bottom right shows the erasing I did on Photoshop, and then left is a detail of the main painting. So how things feed in from a small painting to a bigger painting. I have no idea why this is here. Again, another studio shot to show you the work that's set up in the studio. This painting, 2008 to 20, it partly comes about the plant that's in there. I spent some time in Havana and I drew that plant from life over 2 days and retained those drawings. And finally, I live in Rockdundo, St. Michael in Barbados. There are two Rockdundos for some reason. And the painting on the left is the same one earlier on. And I know looking at that the Rockdundo is too noisy, it's too prominent. And I wanted the spatial relationships to be more physical and more complex. Okay, and then these two I paint on panel because I beat up the pictures a lot and keep going over and over them. So on the left-hand side, and these two paintings here are the plywood panels before they were primed. And because I used wood grain, I thought I would use the grain of the wood itself to inform the painting. So that ended up as that. So again, this has changed phenomenally. And you can see the idea of that the image on the wall repeating the motif of the jug. And it was too obvious in early versions and it ended up as that. I don't know if anyone knows Toots and the Maytals, but Mr. Hibbert died last year, I think. And 5446 is one of my favorite songs, but it's not a song about, it's really a celebration of the music of Toots and the Maytals. And again, this was how the one on the right, that one right, ended up. The floor got completely changed. And this is a more recent painting, large painting, that I've tried not to change so much and tried to be more decisive and plan it in advance. So that wretched bentwood chair, I thought of Stanley in that I wanted to paint the cane by doing every section, taping it out and painting it. So it took about 12 different days of taping and oh, press the wrong stupid button. And this is the same one. This one I included because I saw these blue hydrangeas that a young Frenchman had brought for his wife, newly-wed wife, and it just stuck in my head, this intense blue. It's one of those memory things. And I think, and this is it, this is where we're at. This is my studio here. And I'm making, I hope this is enough for discussion, if it's made any sense at all. Over to you, Isabel.
Plenty of fodder for discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
A few words first, and I would like to congratulate Dennis on his work. I mean, the intensity, their regards for composition and use of color. And when I look at his work, I feel quite solid in my referring to myself as a maker of things and not as an artist. There's so much to be learned from just looking at one of his paintings about what is the meaning of painting. So, Dennis, it was great seeing those works. A great development from the early single paintings, small format of fruits and bowls and things like that. It's a fantastic development. Yes. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Great.
It was good to see a real artist studio, because I don't have a studio. It was good to see a working artist studio, because what I would show bears no comparison, which is the confusion in the garage where I produce expensive sawdust. You know, there's no comparison. No comparison. Great stuff. I enjoyed it tremendously. Thank you, Dennis.
Good. Are you ready for me to start sharing yours?
First of all, as I said, I do not describe myself as an artist, because I make paintings. I construct paintings. I do not paint paintings. And you can see the difference right away between this painting or this painting, yes, as opposed to the work produced by Dennis. So I refer to myself as a maker of things, which means that I'm an artisan, because I like to move about in different types of materials and the way I can put them together in order to produce things. So this painting was based on the events taking place in Guyana in the 1960s, when there were disturbances in the city and so on. So I call this People of the Pavement. It's part of the People of the Pavement series, and it's based on seeing people, the way in which they live on the streets. The man looking into a very posh rubbish bin, which does not look like the kind of rubbish bin he actually be looking at. And also the figures beneath him, actually people I used to see sleeping in underneath places in the by the museum, by the Georgetown Museum. The person on the right is the iconoclast, who likes to break things and smash at things and get into trouble. The lady on the right is like the mother of all things. She's looking on at what is going on. She's the onlooker, observing what's going on. I spend a lot of time composing, and most of my effort goes into the composition. The painting becomes a very mechanical. Painting is a very mechanical act for me, in a manner of speaking. But I tend to work from ideas and concepts, and not directly from things that I'm seeing. So a lot of what you would call the intuition goes on in my mind before the actual work begins. So the creative process of intuition and imagination working between themselves, which will project a vision of what I want to do. And then I set it up there, and that is what I will do. And so there's very little room for changing, because the changes that I would want to do already have taken place in my mind. And so what I'm painting does not really, I should say, excite me or push me into making changes and into experimenting with paint. I do not experiment with paint, I just use it. Yes. So this was from the 1960s, from the last painting I did in the People of the Pavement series, just before I went to Britain, thinking that I would be doing painting. But after my first visit at the National Gallery, I realized, forget about it. Forget about it. This one is based on my interest in geometry and mathematics of a certain kind. Like this is when I was at the University of Guyana, and it is one example of the kind of work I was doing based on repetitions of shapes and movement and the dynamic of lines. And I remember students seeing me working like this and wanting to know what I was doing. And I told them, well, I don't know, you tell me what it is. And they began to look at these paintings of mine, particularly the Hearts and Diamonds series, and started to give me a mathematical reading of what I was doing. And I was really astounded that they were able to see and project what they were doing in their mathematics classes into the work that I was doing. And I was doing it at an intuitive level, making things move together and to present an overall pattern of movement. It's one of my favorite paintings from that period. And I think here there's a little more effort in attempting to paint. Looking at plants, looking at flowers, leaves, and so on, that was the inspiration for this painting. And so it wasn't a direct transposition of the plants that I had seen. So in a sense, I was trying to extract the essence of the plants in order to project it into making this painting. Top left-hand side, you see a round spot there, a black sun. The black sun started to emerge in my work quite early on because I wanted a landscape, and I was trying to put the sun. I said, but the sun doesn't look right. So I decided to make it black. And then later on, I began to read about quantum physics and black holes in space. And I decided to keep on using the black sun to reflect what I was reading about that. And for me too, it is also like a kind of portal. You enter into that black sun and you don't know where you're going to end up. You know, it's like entering into a black hole in space, quantum physics. So, and also I stuck very closely to a limited palette. So before painting, I usually decide what range of colors I'm going to use. So there's a sort of uniformity about the painting because of that. So we're moving it between the greens and the yellows and a little touch of red as the opposite to green. Black, of course, predominates in my work. And I think that's it's a color I like, a color I understand, a color I absorb. And I think my first interaction with black was helping my father paint signboards. And I got very interested in this color black. And so it plays a very important part in my paintings. And very heavily used, especially in the first set of paintings from the People of the Pavement series, because it has a certain resonance. And I feel it tends, for me, it's a color that tends to hold compositions together. The next one, please. This one has a long story. It's called The Artist and the Mother of Space. I remember in Guyana when I first read Harris's Palace of the Peacock, and subsequently read the other novels, early novels. And I felt a very close link to what I was reading because of my own adventures in the forest, in the interior, in the jungle, or the bush, as we call it in Guyana. I felt a very strong feeling. And so I wanted to do some work based on Wilson Harris's work, my experiences. The first paintings I attempted to do were actually in Newcastle. I attempted 3 of them. And as far as I'm concerned, they were hopeless. Forget about it. But the idea of working through Wilson Harris's work remained in my mind for a number of years. And it was not until something like about 30 years later that I decided it is time to attack this thing. So I remember speaking to Wilson in London of what I was attempting to do is that to use his novels and to produce paintings. And he said to me, in his usual way of speaking, I wish you good luck. So I said to Wilson, this is something I need to do. And I'm going to do it, win, lose, or draw. And so I started. So the first set of paintings, of course, trying to reflect his text, I regard as not making it. The first set of paintings, they had a certain complexity about them and figures moving about. But later on, as I got into stride, I realized that it is not so much the extraction of materials from the text, but it's a matter of sharing experiences based on what is written in the text. So in this particular one, the artist was living in London and painting what have you, and had these discussions with his mother of space. And I said, that sounds good. I can handle that. And so this painting, which is one of the best, one of the best of the series, I read 26 novels and I did 24 paintings. Out of 24 paintings, I think only about probably about 6 of them actually made the team. But this one, I think, definitely resonated, because you, the artist, you're looking into the spaces of your mind as well as the spaces of your environment and trying to make connections with them. In this one, I think I got being very close to being a painter in the handling of the material on the canvas. The part that represents the sky, I literally poured the painting on the canvas and allowed it to spread and mix by itself without my interfering with it. And then when that is settled, I started giving it shapes. And then I noticed that part of the shape in the top right-hand side began to resemble a face. I said, okay, I'll emphasize that. And that became the blue outline, the blue figure you see there as the mother of space. Again, I used a very limited palette because I wanted to get some idea of some sort of drama taking place. And this is a drama of the artist in communication with the muse of the artist, with the ideas, concepts, and so on that will come to the artist. And I cannot start a painting until I have a concept. So I cannot be in the studio and work every day at the painting. I just can't do it. I have to have a concept in order to work. And when I've done that, move on to something else. And so it's very difficult to see a visual connections evolving in my work as the way that you saw in Dennis's, because I'm leaping from concept to concept, and each concept will decide how it is going to be presented. So I have to listen to the voice of the concept and say, okay, this is how I want to be presented, and then I can proceed. And of course, in a case like this composition, the figure you see on the left, I avoided drawing for some unknown reason. I know not why. Always found it very difficult to sit down and draw things. And so that my drawings of human beings, they tend to be schematic, because my drawings do not, of the human being. My paintings really, they don't work that well because of that lack of draftsmanship. But I tend to shrug and carry on, because for me, what is important is the idea that is being conveyed, or the ideas that I'm trying to convey within the painting. So I will try as hard as I can to make figures look realistic, but I feel more comfortable in representing figures in this kind of a schematic way, which does involve some drawing, but it's more graphic than anything else. And so we have these silhouetted figures with just a hint of flesh and what have you. The next one, please.
Sure.
This also was part of the Wilson, not the Wilson, this is part of the Mittelhalter. I read Mittelhalter's works as well. Oh, I forgot to say, with the Harris, the last of his novels, I could not find a suitable image, and I'm still looking for it. But I know that with any single, in any single book that he had, there was enough ideas in any single book for me to produce anything like about 10 or 12 paintings, because of the complexity of his writing and the number of concepts and ideas that came through to me. Anyway, for Mittelhalter, I call this particular, the series with Harris, I call Dialogue with Wilson Harris because that is what it was, a dialogue. This series was called Shadows Move Among Them from Mittelhalter's novel. One of the novels I enjoyed, particularly enjoyed, and the other one was My Bones and My Flute. Morning in the Office, I think, is a magnificent work. That is a masterwork. Morning in the Office is this novel. So the title of that book, Shadows Move Among Them, I read it, and in it there was a story of an Amerindian indigenous painter. And when I read it and what he was doing, when George Simon arrived on the scene, I said, Mittelhalter had an idea of what could happen. He did. So in this one, I said, well, I'm going to deal with not from the images that I could derive from the book, but I want to investigate the phenomenon of shadows. So what are shadows? Do they really have an existence? And what do shadows do when we see them, what they're doing? So what I did was to put shadows in all kinds of configurations, doing things that you would associate with people. So in some instances, the shadow could very well be that of an actual person, but in the painting itself, it is the shadow that is doing the work. So the kites are there, and you see a shadow like the person who was flying the kite, but then on the beach, over the seawall, there is a shadow that is actually flying a kite in the sky. And so your mind is moving between the dimensions of an actual shadow, the actual kites, but there in the sky is a shadow of a kite, and there is a shadow of a man flying that kite. Of course, it gave me a chance to reference our kite flying traditions in Guyana. And from my understanding of kite flying, this particular shape actually comes from India, North India, and from Pakistan. And people in Afghanistan also flew kites of that particular kind of shape. But the other fancy kites, like the dragon kite, those are from the Chinese, and the box kites, those are from the Chinese background. And I read of a box kite that was built that actually took a man into the air, and he was being used by the army in order to reconnoiter what was going on with the army they were opposed to oppose. So how true that story is, I don't know, but I do know that the lifting energy and the force of a box kite is something incredible. You do not believe the thing can fly, but it will very quickly and very easily. And so that was the Easter kite painting. I tried to get myself involved in actually painting. My attempts, you can see in the wall, the textures of the wall, and also the textures of the sky. And other than that, it's a straight physical, I used to call it paint by numbers. And I know my wife then in Barbados, who is a painter, she used to want to know, why are you calling your work paint by numbers? I said, because I'm not the painter, you are. And going back in a bit of history, when Dennis Williams learned that I was marrying Alison because he had met Alison, he said to me, you know, this is a very dangerous thing because one of you will destroy one another. I think he was thinking of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera in Mexico, and also other couples like that, Picasso and his, what's the name again? But I laughed to myself because I did not in any way regard myself as an artist. So there was no competition. There was nothing to feel ashamed about. There was absolutely no rivalry because I knew what I was doing, and so did she. And I looked at her work, and I used to shake my head. I said, yeah, I wish I could paint like that, but I can't. Anytime I attempt to do something like that, it ends up muddy and confused. The next one, please. This is the part of a series I call the Doll Series. It has a very interesting history. The doll you see in that painting was a doll I won as a first prize in a raffle. Now, I never win prizes in raffles. And when my landlady asked me to take part in a raffle and to sell me a ticket, I said, no, I will give a donation to the St. John's Ambulance Brigade because I do not win raffles. So she said, I still have to give you the ticket. I said, okay. So then one day entering into the yard, she said, hello, Stanley. I said, hello. She said, good news. I said, what's that? She said, you have won the first prize in the raffle. I said, what? She said, yes. She said, and I feel proud about this because I've been selling raffle tickets for so many years, and it's the first time that I have sold the first prize. So I said, okay. I'm imagining now that the first prize will be a bottle of XM and a tin of Pig Friends biscuits, you know. When she came downstairs and she handed me the box, there's no Pig Friends biscuits going to be in that box. And the weight of the box told me there's no bottle of rum going to be in that box. I went inside, opened the box, and there was this doll looking at me. And I said, what the hell is this? A doll? What am I going to do with a doll? First thought was to give the doll to friends of mine, Collins, who had a daughter. But then something said, no, keep the doll. So I listened to the internal voice, keep the doll. I said, oh, I keep the doll. Put it on the table, dining table. So I'm walking around and look around, and whenever I look, there's this doll on the table looking at me. I said, this is not good. So when I went to Barbados to live, I took the doll with me and I had it there on the table as well. And after a while, I said to myself, you know what? I need to do something about this doll. A little time passed. I went to Jocelyn. I was visiting, and I went to Jocelyn. I was walking down the stairs. I saw something on the door, on the post, the gate post. And what I saw on the gate post was this, on the gate post. And I said, what on earth is that doing there? Is that some obia thing or what? Is it some child's toy? Why was it put there? So I took it up and I took it with me back to Barbados. I had it for a while, but then looking at the hibiscus hedge, whenever the flowers wilt and they hang on the hedge, it reminded me of a figure, female figure with a red skirt. It is like a doll with a skirt. So I'm putting these images together, and with the doll, I said, you know what? I have to exorcise this doll. I have to do something about the spirit of the doll that is invading my imagination. So I decided to do a painting of the doll. So I did this painting. The doll is sitting there and it's looking out to you, as it did to me. Behind the doll are a black sun and some buttons. Those are references to my mother. The scissors, again, another reference to my mother, used to like to cut up cloth. The crackers, the biscuits, reference to the Ejaboy biscuits that Wheaton and Richter used to produce. And the candle and the flame, of course, is to give the idea of some sort of spiritual work is going on. But the person observing what's going on is a macaw. And the macaw is there looking. The doll is also looking. And in a manner of speaking, the buttons are also, there's a lot of looking going on here. The actual biscuit is on fire. It has a flame because this is a magical situation. The spirit of the doll is being exorcised. Well, I thought after doing that painting I'd finished, but no, I had to do two other paintings, the same doll and the biscuits and the candle. And also I included in the other two paintings, the blue and the red and blue macaw, the scarlet macaw. And in the final painting, the magenta macaw, which is a very rare bird, which I saw in the zoo in Guyana. So those are the first three doll paintings. But after that, more ideas started to come to include this doll, and so this doll painting ended up in a small series. In which case now the doll changed. It is no longer this doll with the fancy dress. It became a normal kind of doll, a plain doll. But then that doll was placed into situations. In one of them, the doll is playing with a ball, and then in another one, a shadow of a figure is pointing to the doll in the corner, and so on. But I found it very exciting to produce work at this framework. And what you're seeing is pretty close to the exact size of the painting, because I was working on the format of 9 by 10 inches. And that format enabled me to move on away from the doll into other paintings. The next one, please. We're moving in now into sculpture. I have definitely produced more sculptures than paintings. As a matter of fact, the doll series led to a series which I call the mini paintings of that same size. And to date, I have done 156 of those paintings, and I still have ideas for them again. So that doll painting actually led me into that series of these small format paintings. And in them, I try to retain the actual size of the objects that I use. And so they're not really still life paintings because I use strange conjunctions of objects not related to one another. This here is part of a series, what I call the Dorado Series in sculpture. I did not set out to produce a series. In the mini paintings, again, I did not set out to do a series, but it ended up as that. This sculpture is formed because in front of the yard, in Barbados, there was a peas tree, pigeon peas tree, and I used to observe it, the seasons of the peas developing and so on. And then one day I said, let me do a sculpture based on this thing. And so I used, because I was involved in welding at the time, so I welded up the wire framework and put in the peas and the pods and so on and so forth. And then I got the idea, oh, wait, somebody has to pick peas. Okay, because I had parts of the sculpture gilded, I made the connection with El Dorado. I said, okay, so I'm going to put the hand of El Dorado, as you can see there, in gold leaf, actually holding a gigantic or a large pea. But this is an open work sculpture, and it is a departure from what I normally do, which is solid carving or constructions. But I found that working with the mild steel rods, it enabled me to do a kind of drawing in space. So it's not a two-dimensional drawing. It's really a three-dimensional drawing, construction, or sculpture at the same time. So this is the El Dorado from the El Dorado series of El Dorado picking peas. The series went on, and I did about 14 pieces, and each one of them dealt with some aspect of El Dorado. But again, I did not put El Dorado into the kind of a historic setting. This is El Dorado picking pigeon peas. I have El Dorado's bucket. I have El Dorado's river boat, things like that, his umbrella. And I went through an entire series like that of the El Dorado series, which I showed them actually in an exhibition at the OS in Washington. I do not have many exhibitions in recent years because I'm sort of outside of the art scene. I look on at the art scene, but at the same time, I continue doing my own work. The next one, please. This was done in Barbados. There was a soap that we use in Guyana, blue soap, which is used for domestic washing up. It's a salt soap, as they used to call it. So I wanted to remember my mother and her scrubbing board and this blue soap. So I decided to do this figure, which I called blue soap. So in a way, it's also an homage to my mother. In my sculptures and my paintings, I do have references to my parents. They appear in all kinds of fashions, but there are references. This one is a reference to my mother, for one, the image, but it's also a reference to my father, who also worked in wood, and my grandfather as well. So this idea of working in wood definitely is an inheritance. I feel more comfortable working in wood and materials than in painting. So definitely this had involved me more than the actual painting in a spiritual sense. So the working of this, the carving and the shaping, you can say is like a parallel to the painter using a brush. But in my case, I'm using tools, hand tools, which I like to use. Growing up as a child, my first tool, 10 years old, 9 years old, my first tool were razor blades, the double-edged razor blades. And I used to use them to cut little pieces of wood and to create shapes. I never drew blood. And I made something once, and a friend in the yard, the tenement yard, he took it away from me, and I started to behave bad. And my father came to find what is happening, and I said, he took that away from me. And he said, how did you make this? Well, when I handed it to him, he saw the marks in my hand. My hand had chopped marks, little marks, scars, but no blood. And that was when I was allowed to own a penknife. And I was warned not to take the penknife with me when I was going on the road. But of course I did, because when you're sent on errands as a boy, you have to wait for big people to talk to you. So while I'm waiting for them to do that, I am chipping away. This piece then is reminiscent of the scrubbing board. The next one, the ancestral chair. Visiting museums, I would see what they call African art. I do not call it African art, because the people who are producing those carvings and sculptures were not producing art. I still don't have a definition for art. And loosely speaking, they say African art, I dismiss that. But I like the way in which they dealt with forms, because that's one of my preoccupations. In sculpture, of course, you're dealing with forms. And I like the way that certain pieces of work were articulated in forms. And so I had the idea of making a reference to part of my African ancestry, my part African ancestry. And I did this thing as an homage to the ancestors called the ancestral stool. So there's the female figure and the male figure at the top, the two faces. And then at the side of them are their children, which are also arms. And then in the chair, in between the legs of the chair, you can see little white shapes there. And those are actually little faces. And those were the ancestral faces. I did this while I was at the University of Guyana. And it is owned by, it's in the collection of Rupert Roopnaraine. I regard it as one of my most important pieces. So I'm about to do a version of it. And this time I'm using a wood from Africa, which has a purplish, forgot the name now, has a purplish color. And so that really will go into the image of the ancestral stool from Africa. It will have the same formation with some slight changes. Working with wood, to me, it involves the total me as a person. And in this is not a direct carving, it's a construction. And so from what I had in mind, instead of carving a stool directly into a block of wood, I decided to do a construction, which enabled me to make the piece expand into space, to take up space and provide a volume. At the university, one of the workers, he was the head of maintenance. He used to come in and look at what I'm doing, and he said, "Oh, those things look like the cashew seeds." I said, "Of course, that's where those heads. That's where I got the idea for the heads, from the seed of the cashew." And then, of course, the idea of the spheres. I did not use the spheres for everything, because the spheres represent the female personality, and the more triangular pieces, they represent the male personality. And I gave them the opposing colors to represent the duality, red and green. And duality is a very important concept for me in my work. So here we have the forms, and also you have a sense of duality in the shape of the legs, which are painted in white. So you have the colors, white, the red, and the green, which introduces another dimension into the piece, which could have remained unpainted. And the next one, please. This is what I'm doing
And
now.
sorry to interrupt. We're going to have to just move along. I'm conscious you still got a few more of the ceramics to go through.
Okay.
And
I'll
so
move on.
just accelerate the pace slightly, please.
No problem.
Thank you.
This here is a series I'm working on that I call, well, a friend of mine saw them and he said they look like citadels. This is number 2. I've done 3, and I have ideas to do 3 more. And that's the end of the series, because something like this, you can continue doing ad nauseum. And I like here the possibility of using different kinds of materials in order to produce different visual experiences, different textures as well. Okay, the next one. The slave stock, this is the second one. The first one I did at Newcastle, and it won several prizes. It came to Ghana, won a prize in the National Collection. I went one day to take a photograph, and nothing could be found except like one of the sections you see there on the whip, just a small piece. So somebody had removed it, and I was about to put a curse on it, but I decided no. Think in terms that whoever took it wanted to make use of the mahogany, because that's solid mahogany. And I hope that whatever they made from that mahogany was something useful and something that looked good. So I did the second version of it because it's an important piece of work. This is now in the OAS collection. It was bought by the embassy in Washington and presented to the OAS. It's now in the OAS collection. The whip, of course, is a snake. The piece that you see like a snake, that's a whip. The idea of the whip came from seeing the slave whip in the museum, which has strands of leather, and around each bit of leather is a piece of copper wire that they look like a whip from barbed wire. And I try to imagine that somebody being whipped by that thing. But of course, you know that famous photograph of the American farmer slave with his back with all those scars. That kind of whip would have produced those scars. Anyway, he survived. The next one, please. I used to go visit my aunt when I was 9, 10 years old, and I would see the marabantas, as we call them, the wasps, making little gourds like that in which they lay their eggs. Tiny little things. And I looked at this thing, I said, but marabantas don't have fingers, they don't have brains. How on earth can they make something like that? I have fingers, I have brains, I will make a pot. So I made a little pot. And because I was in charge of the coal pot at home, I became scientific. I said, my mother, she will bake bread. The bread is soft and she bakes it. So I'm going to put this little clay pot under the coal pot in order to be baked. Of course, it exploded. And that was the end of my experiment because, you know, my mother wanted to know what was going on kind of thing. So I could not do that anymore. I was, 9, 10 years old. It's not until I went to Howard University that I began to do work again. So that was the thing that led me into making ceramics, the Marabanta clay pot. The next one, please. The forms I use are based either on organic forms that I look at, roots and tubers, and this one is called the yam pot, and it is glazed in black, which I like because it really brings out the form. It's an irregular form. It is hand built, so you go bit by bit. And usually, in order to do this, I can't work from a drawing. I have to make a little model so that I get an idea of what is going on all around. And then from that little model, I can begin to make the form and make adjustments as I go along. This is the first the first of the yam pots. And since then, I did about 2 more, and that's the end of the yam pots. Because forms like this, you can carry on forever and ever and ever. So having explored the idea, it was time to move on. The next one, please. This is based on my reading of the pottery traditions in Mali and West Africa, and I liked the forms that I saw, and so I decided to do a pot. So I call this Gene Geno, from the place in Mali where they have this very strong tradition. I did not use a wheel. I don't like using a wheel. So this was hand-built, so it takes time. And the construction, I decided not to glaze it because I do not like glazing the outside of terracotta pots. I like the color of terracotta, which is warm. It gives you an idea of flesh, of living, of something living. And so that's Gene Geno. I only glaze the inside of pots like that. So I've done a second version for myself. This version is in Barbados. Next, please. This one is a coal pot, going back to the days of having to tend the coal pot for my mother. The additions you see to it are based on my observation of ceramics from Middle America, from Mexico, Mesoamerica. And those Semiramis, they are just fantastic. What they can do with clay is just extraordinary. And so I did those additions to that pot, paying my obeisance to the potters from central Mexico. So that's my coal pot. And the little faces you can see there are the little effigies you sometimes see on those pots. And I remember seeing Stephanie Correa as well doing the same thing on her pots. And so I did put in those little faces on the pot. Yes. The next, please. And this is paying my distinct patronage, not patronage, heritage to the indigenous potters of both Mesoamerica and also of Guyana. And the technique there of coating the clay with a layer of white slip, they call it slip, and then carving into it to release the brown terracotta underneath in order to create patterns. That's a traditional way of doing it. I like that tradition, and I decided to invent my own forms instead of appropriating forms from the indigenous peoples, because I did not like doing that. I did 3 paintings once and decided this is not good for me, because the forms that I appropriated, they meant nothing anybody viewing them, and they would mean nothing as well to indigenous peoples. So I moved away from that. So I tended to create my own forms. And this is a large hand-built form. I did a number of them, what I call my Arawak pots. Yes, the next one, please. Hand building again, a piece of sculpture I call Dreaming of Mangoes. So the mango itself is a personage, and the mango probably is dreaming of something, I don't know what, perhaps dreaming of not being eaten by a human being. And there you have the man himself, he's dreaming of eating mangoes. And to create the feeling of something dreaming, we have the hand, which is supporting this head with eyes closed, that the person is dreaming of mangoes. It is the first, or rather the last piece I did, a sculpture in ceramics as a sculptural form. But there are ideas, of course, in my notebooks. I have several notebooks that works in them, to do more forms of this nature, dreaming of mangoes. Thank you. I think that was the last, was it?
Yes, it was. Yes. Yes. So, wow, thank you. That was quite a tour. And I'm sure that I did see a hand go up. It may have gone down since at some point, but you were mid-flow, so I just let you continue. Did you have any pressing questions for Dennis, or Dennis, did you have anything that you wanted to ask Stanley?
I wanted just to congratulate Stanley for a wonderful talk, and thanks for introducing so many different things and reminding me about what making can be and the breadth of your endeavors. Thank you.
Yes. As I said, I have to work on ideas, and ideas come then. And my problem is that I then have to find an appropriate form to express that idea. That's my problem. So I have to learn all kinds of techniques and get into trouble doing so. Yes.
So in that case, I will open the floor. If anyone in the audience has questions, if you'd like to use the raise your hand icon, or failing that, if you just raise your hand, I will look through and try and find you whichever way suits.
First presentation, I took out about 12 slides from Matisse showing progress like I showed of mine. And just for brevity, I took those out. So you hit the nail on the head. Matisse is hugely important for a number of reasons, but he is important. He's been a huge influence. And secondly, in terms of interiors, one of the things being in the Caribbean is the sense of interior is always in conjunction with the exterior. So exterior and interior always seem to go together. So you never get an enclosed room as you would in winter in North America or in Europe. So interior and exterior, and I think Matisse sometimes in the paintings he made in the south of France references that with open windows. But I hope that, well, that's a short answer, but yes, Matisse is a big influence. And I actually took out some slides that showed the way he changed his paintings and interior, exterior, if that's. Well, thank you. It comes, and that's partly what the struggle is to get patterns that work spatially and with color and with the other patterns around them for it to be coherent without following perspectival lines. So, but yes, does that make sense? Sorry, that's a more difficult question to answer. Thanks, Ron. No, not really. In the 19th century in Europe, they had a hierarchy of subject matter, and if you were really good, you could do history painting, and then you could do portraits and landscapes. At the very bottom of this hierarchy was still life painting. When I moved to England to study, I never felt confident enough to take on, I don't know, portraiture. I don't know.
Okay.
I've come back to objects, but I don't just see it as still life. And they've kind of expanded into a bigger space, I think, into interiors and exteriors. And I hope that they serve a slightly different purpose to normal still life. And I'm really glad you saw the short Castellani house.
Okay.
I was delighted to show there after, so many years. It was a real, it was a real pleasure. So I'm glad you saw that show.
No, it's not, definitely not deliberate, because people who see those pots, they always make the same thing, that it looks like a heart, But I remember students seeing me in the supermarket and so on, and asking what I'm doing. I said, they saw me looking at things. And I said, well, when I pick up a yam or an edo, I look at it very carefully to see if it has a very pleasant shape. Otherwise, I will not buy it. The shape has a certain thing about it. So it is looking at those shapes eventually that allowed me to put things together and create what I call the yam pots. But people always say they look like a version of a heart. Well, I hope my heart doesn't look like that. Yes, dreaming of mangoes. The head of the mango itself, the mango head, is a separate piece, and the hand with the little man dreaming, that's also separate. So the two of them, I made a base, and I placed both of them in a certain conjunction in order to create some sort of dynamic going on between the two. Both forms are hollow, of course, otherwise, they'd explode in the kiln. So hand-built, hollow, and usually in order to get that kind of finish, you can burnish the shape, or you can use sandpaper. So I tended to use the sandpaper so that I produce something that more appearing more like a skin of a fruit or something, rather than a stone, something bright and shiny. I really got into ceramics in Barbados when I worked with Bill Grace, the late Bill Grace. I learned a lot from him. I used to work in his studio, so I had about a year or two working with him to pick up techniques of how you handle clay, how you treat clay, and what are the possibilities of using clay. Yes, thank you.
That's an easy question to answer, Tracy, because I know when to stop when I go to do something and it's just for the sake of doing it. So it's purposeless. So I always, unfortunately, and I have to see something. So if the background is blue and I think it might work in green, I can't visualize that. I have to go and paint the damn thing green and then realize that the blue is better and then get back to it. And that process builds on itself, and you become, I'm old, so I've become more experienced at doing things. I'm now trying to finish things, try to visualize it more clearly. But it's when I come to painting, and if there's nothing purpose, if I really don't want to do something, then it's pointless. But the big painting, Turquoise Avenue, is actually up in my living room, has been bugging me and bugging me, and it's been professional photographs. It's finished, but it's not, because I've just realized one thing that I know I have to do to it. So I'm going to have to bring paint up and finish. So on the whole, but I knew there was something wrong with that painting, and I think I've solved it. But normally it comes to an end, but I know that it's something just chimes, something's in harmony.
In my case, I don't have your problem, Dennis, because the thing in my mind is already crystallized. So I will make a drawing to help me along a bit, but not even a detailed drawing in most cases. And so then I have the thing, it's fixed in my mind already. So as I start working, I have a specific goal and intention, and I move towards it. So I don't have that problem, because I know from your paintings you're gonna have problems. Should I put this color here or that color there? I don't, thank heavens, I don't have that problem.
But Stanley, that's what I really like. I know, looking at your sketchbooks,
Yes.
it's like going into your mind and you can see the painting there. And I love the fact that you don't have to change something. You work that problem out in advance. And I think that difference is just wonderful.
Yeah, I have actually 11 of those sketchbooks, and I don't like going into them because I see how much work is there that I will never be able to accomplish in this incarnation. So I'm praying that I can be reincarnated again to continue the work. It's either that or my son or my grandson, who are also good at their hands. They can go in there and find things to do, and change it or pattern according to their own desires. But the stuff isn't there. And I always remember the fun I used to have looking at copies of Leonardo's notebooks. And a Leonardo notebook I recommend is the Leonardo's cookbook. Leonardo had a book that talked about recipes and his things about cooking. It is just hilarious. So you should check out Leonardo's cookbook. It was found in the collection in Buckingham Palace or something.
But I saw the Vesuvian Man in Venice a few years ago. By chance, it just happened to be on view. They don't have it out very often. And what's remarkable seeing this tiny piece of paper is that you're actually looking into Leonardo's head. He's all thinking. He wasn't really thinking, how can I make a painting of a man, which is, how do I do proportions? He was thinking, and if you look at the studies of water, which are just...
Yeah, I saw that.
But you see the mind working, it's like you look into the head.
Yep.
Van Gogh's sketchbooks as well do a similar thing. Van Gogh's sketchbook show you his head, I think, inside his head. Yeah.
Yes. Writing poems to me is another form of making. I've also done compositions for classical guitar. They're all forms of making, of doing. So the doing is very important, action, movement. When I tell students about movement in painting, I used to tell them as well, you know, when I'm movement is something that can be transferred, transport, everything. That's when I'm stirring my cornmeal porridge, I use my left hand and I go this way, and I've changed my right hand, I go this way. I said, why do you do that? I said, because I have both hands, and they have to work in a complementary fashion. You know, yes, but that's about it.
Okay.
Stanley, you go first.
So you send me to bat first, opening batsman.
Yeah, you take the first ball.
I know
Take
because
shine off the ball.
right, because of work I've done, figurative work I've done in the past. It can have a political connotation, but in my mind, it's more sociological than political as such. I did do a series which I called "There's a Meeting Here Tonight," which is actually political in intent, and they are creating incidents, some of which I observed, and some of which are my own projections as to what was going on in politics in Guyana and also in Santo Domingo, where I had visited during shows from Barbados in Santo Domingo. And so those paintings do have a political content, but at the same time, they have a sort of surrealist element to them, because they're not specifically pointing to politics as such. They're more like the kind of things that occupy people's attentions. But there are a few pieces like the one I did of the political statue. There was a statue that was being created for the Barbadian Prime Minister, and they had the thing covered in garbage bags tied up with cords. And I said, but how can you treat your Prime Minister covering it over with garbage bag and tying it up in cords? So I did a painting based on that, with the political figure. Yes, so politics did come into it. Also, I did one of a man in a drum, an oil drum, and his hand is poking out with a stick with a piece of paper in it, and that was a reference to the votes that during Barnum's year, they said votes came in drums and barrels from overseas. So that is my reference to that. I also did one of a table with candles and a cake and a Bible and things like that, because it was a question of people involving in spiritual obeah practices in order to give a backing to their prospective political candidates. So yes, there's that political implication in that particular series, but not in all of the figurative paintings that I've done.
Mr. Lesnot, my answer is relatively straightforward, with a little bit of juice. I feel that political painting is very, I think of Diego Rivera, who was decidedly political, and his work was geared to initiate political change. And I think work can be political without having politics as its overt subject. So sometimes it's a highly political act to be independent and to make work that's about you, your freedom of expression for the individual. And so I noticed this in Cuba, that a lot of Cuban artists were kind of pigeonholed into making art that was either against Castro or for Castro. And depending on the audience, the external audience loved a lot of the, especially in North America, that was anti-Castro, and an internal audience wanted pro-Castro. And I think sometimes it's a political act to make work that is personal and it's about oneself. So that, for example, you're free to make work about color or landscape or formal issues, abstract. It doesn't have to have a didactic purpose.
But what you said is, yes, sorry, what you said is very relevant because I remember a time during the Barnum years, I had a painting because I like large leaves. I did a painting of Makamaka leaves, and Basil Hines had it in his house. A visitor said to him, "Why is Stanley Greaves painting leaves when he should be doing political whatever, blah, 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 blah." But then Basil told me later on, the guy came back a bit later and said, "But you know something? He has all right to paint leaves." I said, perfect. Because I remember Chardin, I remember in the mini paintings I did, I went to the Metropolitan Museum to look at mini paintings at one stage. And there was a particular little painting of a Chardin painting of fishes and a knife. His wife had just gone to the market and bought these fishes, put it on the table, and she couldn't use them because he wanted to do a painting. See, but at the same time, the tumbrils were running up and down the streets in Paris, cutting off people's heads. And he was painting a little painting based on fishes his wife had bought. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Not quite sure how to pull all these strands together. Did you, Stanley or Dennis, have any closing remarks that you'd like to make?
Thank you for organizing this, Isabel, and thanks to Stanley. It was really enjoyable. And I apologize if my contributions have not been as articulate as Mr. Greaves. He's got more experience. He's a wordsmith anyway, so thank you for everyone attending as well. Thank you.
Well, Dennis, it was good to have the two of us because we're working on two different planes, we're poles apart, polarity. But between what I do and what you do is a whole spectrum of what artists do. It's a whole spectrum. So it was good to have the polarity because I like to do a lot of reading about duality, which is a very important metaphysical principle that I like to think about and also involves in my work. Yes, it's like that. I like to thank again Isabel. I call her Isabel because that's her real name. Isabel is an English name, for making it possible for us to have these presentations in order to reach out to people, in order to have the sort of interlocution, people asking questions, which is also very important because it enables you to not only to concentrate and to form answers in your mind, it also helps to clear up ideas. And I remember Martin Carter used to tell me, he said, you must talk. It is always good to talk because when you do that, ideas which are in your subconscious and concept, they come forward. I'll come back to Martin. Martin said to me once that all of the poems that he has written are really fragments of the poem that will never be written. And I always remember those words. All of the poems that he's written are fragments of the poem. So I think of it, well, all of the paintings I'm doing are fragments of the painting that will never be painted. And the same goes for the other works. But you have to continue. You have to proceed. As these things come to you, you have to give them form. Otherwise, they remain running around in your head like ants. You have to give them form. So you have to proceed. Yes.
Yes. And I suppose that if I can hazard a generalization, that in a sense what happens is that your fragments are discrete and take the form of a sequence, and Dennis's fragments kind of occur on the same, in sequential order, on the same canvas. So there's the process for him is a building of experience on one canvas, and yours you tend to split into.
It's an incremental development, which is very important to see in the work of people. For me, I'm moving about like a fly, I'm buzzing around the place. But it's good to see the incremental development of the work to get a process of how this thing happens. So for me, it was like seeing Dennis's early, small, single bowl on the table, pattern tablecloth, and to seeing the recent work, which are just mind-blowing, extraordinary.
Mm.
Or just say in French, extraordinaire.